All right. Just wanted to welcome folks who are coming in, and we'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for being here. Yeah, looks like we have a great group assembling, Meryl. So whenever you feel comfortable, feel
Okay.
free to take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Jen. Welcome everyone to Gallen's webinar on essays for applying to medical school. My name is Meryl Kramer. I was a former director of admissions at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, and I am one of the medical school counselors here at Gallen Education. I'm probably not telling you something that you do not already know, but applying to medical school involves quite a bit of writing. And more importantly, it is the style of writing that may be somewhat unfamiliar or particularly challenging for students who have spent much of their academic life writing scientific reports or analyses. This writing style calls for a reflective and thoughtful tone that helps portray a picture of who you are along with your suitability for the medical profession. But you can look at it on the positive side. The application's writing portions, along with the secondary essays, provide you with a unique opportunity to tell your story. One way to look at this is to ask yourself, what do you want the admissions committees to know about you? Because everyone is more than what is presented as objective data, such as your GPA or your MCAT scores. Your writing is one of the few areas of the application process that is really within your control, and you can use it to help demonstrate and convince medical schools you are ready to pursue medicine by sharing your story. So let's discuss the details.
And actually, can I chime in really quickly,
Yeah,
Meryl, just
sure.
to let folks know? Welcome everyone who just joined us. We're so happy you're here. Just wanted to let you know that I'll be here answering questions in the chat, keeping track of that. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to leave them in the chat. And actually, would just love to hear from folks if you are seeing I was having a little technical difficulty earlier. I'm wondering if you're seeing any black, small, little pixelated boxes on our screen. If you are, can you just let us know in the chat? Yes, I am seeing those little black boxes. You are. Okay, great. So I'm going to change the screen so we can kind of remove those really quickly. So hold on really tight for that. And then we'll get started with going with these other components that Meryl's ready to share. So let me share my screen with you all, and we're ready to roll. So if you could just let us know in the chat one more time if now you're seeing it without any black boxes. Can you just say yes for us? Yes, perfect. Okay,
Okay,
great.
well, that's good news.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for being here again. Meryl's going to take it away in a moment, but again, my name is Jen and I'm also here. We'll be answering questions throughout, so feel free to put those questions in the chat, but mostly at the end, we'll leave space for that. So again, want to thank you for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to Meryl so she can really talk to you about what are the major components that you need to be thinking about in terms of essays. So feel free to take it away, Meryl, and just tell
Sure.
me
Thank
next
you.
slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. Sorry for the black boxes. I'm the only one that didn't see them, I guess. Um, so I'm just going to go over the basics, or what are the major written components of the application. So, of course, the personal statement, and I'll be talking about that in depth in a moment. Other essays might include the other impactful experience essay, which is optional, and I'll also discuss that. The experiences and activity entries, can be considered mini essays. This is the section of the application where you can list up to 15 entries regarding your activity, such things as your research, perhaps teaching or tutoring experience, your community service, clinical experiences, your employment, um, publications, for example, honors, hobbies, advocacy, and you have up to 700 characters to describe these activities. And then you are also asked, and this is the AMCAS application I'm referring to, you're asked to select 3 of the 15 that you choose as your most meaningful experiences. And here you have an additional 1,325 characters to further explain why the experience is most meaningful for you. And they are small little essays. Another part of the application process occurs um, outside of the primary application, and these are the secondary essays, and they are specific for the school. So when you apply to medical school, once the school receives your primary application, they will contact you to complete secondary essays. They may be 4 or 5 essays. Um, and they can be labor intensive. I'll talk about that a little bit more fully later. There are special program essays, in particular, if you are applying MD, PhD, there are 2 additional essays that you will complete, and I'll briefly speak about them in a moment as well. And then finally, if you're subject to an institutional action or you have a felony or a misdemeanor, the application will require you to write about that. And that's another short essay. Next slide. Okay, so there are 3 application services. AMCAS is one of the best known application service, standing for the American Medical College Application Service. If you are applying to allopathic schools, you're likely completing this application. The personal statement, the format asks that you use plain text. There are no bullet points. You do not indent paragraphs, and you're asked not to use bold or italic fonts. The character limit is 5,300 characters, and AMCAS does offer a prompt and things to consider. So the prompt is use the space below to explain why you want to go to medical school. It's a very broad statement. And to consider why you have selected the field of medicine, consider what motivates you to learn more about medicine, what you want the medical schools to know about you. And you can also include information that may not be included elsewhere, such as challenges, obstacles you've overcome, or hardships. Next slide, Jen. The other application for allopathic applicants, if you're applying to the Texas schools, you will need to complete TMD SAS, and their prompt asks, explain your motivation and to seek a career in medicine. Be sure to include the value of your experiences that prepare you to be a physician. And you'll notice the character limit is slightly less than AMCAS, 5,000 characters. For those students that are interested in applying to osteopathic schools for a DO, you would need to complete a COMAS, which is the osteopathic medicine application service. The character limit here is the same as AMCAS, 5,300 characters, and I do not believe they offer a prompt, but it's basically the same information, but you would certainly want to gear it your personal statement towards osteopathic medicine. Next slide. So let's begin with the personal statement. Many students ask, how do I begin? Where do I begin? It's not an easy process. It is a central component of the application, and I do think it has greater impact for some applicants than other applicants. And I say this because, particularly for students that have strengths within their credentials or their background, but also may not have a straightforward application, may also have some weaknesses, I think the personal statement takes on a greater significance. And so it's important that you devote enough time to write your personal statement, to refine it, to submit drafts, have other people read your essay certainly before it's ready for submission. Your story does not need to be unique. Often it's relatable everyday experiences that can be written in a compelling way if you're able to provide insights and demonstrate growth. And I think, the key really to this entire conversation that we're having is to demonstrate your insights and show reflection. Next slide. So here's one approach. And again, there are many ways to go about creating the personal statement, but here's one idea that may help you. Start by making a chronological list of the pivotal moments in your life, in your journey, and focus on those experiences that have led you toward medicine, including your personal or family story, your academics, your activities, as well as other interests. And then begin to write about the significance of each entry on your list, such as its impact on your growth, the lessons learned, and the ways in which each experience has influenced your desire to pursue medicine. Once you have written a paragraph or a little story for each entry, try to choose those that will make for engaging reading and begin to explore ways to transition from paragraph to add in the flow of the essay. And then finally, consider the personal competencies as you begin to write. Think about 3 or 4 personal qualities that you really want the medical schools to know about you. Next slide. So, for example, imagine that you grew up with a sibling who had type 1 diabetes. You observed the role that insulin played in, you know, the health of your sibling, and you also witnessed the emotional toll that diabetes had upon you, your sibling, and the entire family. Perhaps you began to love science after taking biology in high school. Imagine that you had a grandfather who developed kidney disease requiring dialysis, and he moved in with your family when you were 16. You enrolled in a large university in an urban area, and you majored in neuroscience. During your time as an undergraduate, you volunteered at a clinic primarily serving an immigrant community. Spent 2 summers as a camp counselor for kids with childhood cancer. You completed 2 semesters of research as an undergraduate in neuroscience. During the summers, you shadowed a pediatrician, a cardiologist, and a neurologist, and you tutored kids in science in an underserved community. You're taking a gap year and you'll be working as a medical assistant in a dermatology practice. Next slide. Okay, so I mentioned before the competencies. These traits or values have been established by the AAMC, and medical schools really pay attention to whether an applicant has met these competencies. And so in order to do that, they want to see the evidence that you have acquired cultural awareness, or that you've had experience on a team and you know how to collaborate. They want to see evidence that you demonstrate empathy. So reading through these: cultural awareness, cultural humility, service orientation, being committed to learning, ethical responsibility, resilience and adaptability, reliability and dependability, etc. You want to make in my opinion, the connection between your writing and demonstrating evidence that you have these competencies. So next slide, please. So just as a brief example, we can try to connect the dots here between the personal inventory and the competency. So for example, growing up with a sibling with type 1 diabetes, really try to think, what did you learn from this? What was its impact? And how did it change you? How did you grow from this? And then you'll notice on the right side, if you can show this demonstration, you are showing that this experience has led to your personal growth, to your resilience, your adaptability, as well as your empathy. Volunteering at a clinic serving an immigrant community. In your writing, reflect on the patients that you met there. How did you establish rapport with them? Perhaps you can include an anecdote from one of these patients within your personal statement. This experience demonstrates cultural humility, teamwork, cultural awareness, service orientation, and your communication skills. The laboratory research. I'm sure, you meet challenges, you grow. What did you learn from the research? This demonstrates, again, teamwork, collaboration, commitment to learning, communication skills, and other competencies. Tutoring. Try to think about how you established rapport with these kids. This, again, shows evidence of your interpersonal skills and your cultural awareness, perhaps. And another example, working as a medical assistant. Really think about the patients that you've met or will meet. What have you learned? What is it like to work on a healthcare team? What are the challenges? How did this experience further your motivation for medicine, and how did it impact your growth? This type of experience helps to demonstrate your teamwork skills, your communication skills, your adaptability, your empathy, and your ethical standards. And again, you don't need to come out and say, I tutored, therefore I have great interpersonal skills, but your writing will hopefully come across to show this evidence. Next one. So now you need to really dig deep and tell your story. Be reflective. I think that's probably, the best advice I can give you, and take your time. If you're starting this process well in advance, it's very helpful to begin to journal and to jot down perhaps patients you met or kids that you met in tutoring, and then go back to that journal to help inspire your writing. Next slide. So in constructing the personal statement, I suggest build a foundation by telling your story chronologically. Think about the ways your past shaped and has led you towards medicine, and make it easy for the reader to follow your story. That's one reason why I think it's a good idea to tell your story chronologically. You want to make it as easy as you can for anyone reading the your essay. You can certainly start with an anecdote, and many applicants do, but you don't have to. And you may have a theme within your personal statement, but you certainly don't have to do that either. Some applicants are able to connect two of their passions, such as music or dance or soccer, and relate some of these competencies to medicine. It's also fairly common, but not necessary, to write about the impact that perhaps illness has had upon you or a family member or a friend. But, that does not apply to everyone, and it's certainly something you don't need to do. And try your best to weave the stories together so that there is a flow to your essay. Keep in mind, not everyone has experienced something unique, mind-blowing, and that's fine. And write from your heart and demonstrate your compassion and your humility. And think about, what are your values? Remember to keep the message broadly, because your audience, you don't know who's going to be reading these essays. When I was director of admissions, part of my job was to read every personal statement. And, you know, I was a staff member. I'm not a science person. I'm not a physician. But there will be perhaps people like me reading your essays. There will be physicians reading your essays. There will be basic scientists reading your essay. You just don't know. And so you want to keep the message broad. And try to think of ways to present yourself beyond the numbers. This is your opportunity to do that. Next slide, please. So as an outline, it's probably a good idea to start with an introductory paragraph to provide context and your motivation. And then the body of the essay can include several paragraphs to discuss perhaps your experiences, your insights, your growth, including the evidence to support your suitability. You may have heard this before, but show, don't tell. It's also probably a good idea to use examples or anecdotes that demonstrate your humanity and relevance to the profession. And think about, what led you to engage in X, Y, or Z. This will help you to transition from paragraph to paragraph. And then finally, your concluding paragraph. Many times the concluding paragraph may circle back to the introductory paragraph, kind of close the loop. But oftentimes it will also include your vision, your goals, and the impact that you hope to achieve by pursuing medicine. And as you write, keep asking yourself, what is the message that you are conveying? Next slide. Here's some do's and don'ts. The do's: convey the distance you have traveled. And this is important. The medical schools really want to know, how did you decide to pursue medicine, and the steps that you've taken along this journey. And it is definitely a journey. Um, be authentic. It's very important. And write from your heart, not just your head, and write with humility. You may want to include challenges you have faced, but recognize that you will have other opportunities to discuss hardships, either in the impactful essay, certainly in secondary essays. Um, make every word count. So you don't want a lot of fluff in there. You want to be concise and to the point. This is not a literary essay. The essay is a reflection of who you are, why you have chosen medicine, and why you would be a good fit for the profession. Um, Without question, you need to proofread and do it over and over and over again. Be sure to have others read your essay before you submit. I find it's helpful to read it out loud, to yourself and to others, and to seek advice, either from your pre-med advisor, a professional counselor, an essay coach, from professors, family, and friends, all of the above. The more, I mean, you don't want to go crazy with the opinions, but you certainly want people that you trust to read your essay and to make sure that, after they read it, they're actually getting the message that you hope to send. And here's some don'ts. Don't display blame, excuses, or victimhood. Don't criticize physicians or the system. Avoid quotes or cliches. Don't try too hard to sell yourself, and don't write what you think schools want to hear. They want to get to know your authentic self. Avoid flowery or overly creative language, and avoid overly scientific jargon. You don't need to use, super big words and thinking you're going to impress the committees with your knowledge. Um, with the exception of MD, PhD essays. But by and large, for the straight personal statement, no. Um, Stay away from being I-centric. You don't want to start every paragraph, I did this, I did this, I did this. In general, the personal statement is not the best place to write about academic difficulties. You want to keep a positive message. Carefully consider the impact of disclosing a disability or mental health issue in the personal statement, and seek advice if this is something that you are considering. And of course, without question, do not use AI to write your statement. Next slide, please. Many applicants, ask about, how personal should this essay be? And it is a personal essay. However, you don't want it to be too personal. And by that I mean, and this I found Dr. Lazarus from Lewis Katz Temple Medical School offered some pretty sound advice. Relevance. Personal experience should have relevance to your journey towards medical school. We discussed this earlier. Professionalism. avoid sharing information that could potentially be viewed negatively or controversially. Personal topics such as religion, politics, or highly personal experiences should be approached with caution unless they directly relate to your motivation for pursuing medicine. And it's important to discuss your strengths and how you have overcome challenges to demonstrate your growth. Next slide. So if you're thinking about disclosing highly personal stuff, some things to consider. Has the trauma directly influenced your decision to pursue medicine? If yes, it may be appropriate to discuss it. If not, I would leave it out. If you choose to disclose, focus on the ways you overcame the trauma or the challenge. What did you learn, and how did it contribute to your empathy or your understanding? And avoid making the reader uncomfortable. So don't be graphic in your explanation of a particular highly personal event in your life. So quoting Dr. Lazarus, disclosing trauma should not be the primary focus of the essay, rather a part of your journey. And I think that's pretty important stuff there. Next slide, please. So what is the goal of the personal statement? If you submit an essay that exhibits reflection, insights, and growth conveyed through the impactful experiences of your life while expressing your motivation, your passion, and your readiness for medicine, you will have accomplished the goal of the personal statement. Ideally, your personal statement will demonstrate you have the personal attributes outlined in the competencies that I talked about. And based on the story you share, the admissions committee will review your academic strengths and readiness by your metrics, your letters of recommendation, along with your personal statement and secondary essays in deciding whether to offer you an interview. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, there is another opportunity to talk about obstacles or challenges in more detail. And this was added to the MCAS application just a couple of years ago. And then the question asks, have you overcome challenges or obstacles in your life that you'd like to describe in more detail? This could include lived experiences related to your family background, financial background, community setting, educational experiences, or other life experiences. You have 1,325 characters. Most applicants will not have to complete this essay, so you don't want to force it. But if you do have something you want to share with the admissions committees, certainly keep a positive message of resilience. You could include, in examples, family background. Maybe you were a first generation college student. Maybe you were a caretaker to a family member. Maybe you grew up in a rural area with high poverty or high crime or lack of healthcare access. Perhaps your family background, you've had to work to support the family. This would be something that you would want to include in this extra essay. If you grew up with limited opportunities and access to educational experiences. You might want to include that, or other barriers beyond your control that impacted your life. For example, maybe your home was affected by a hurricane, for example. This would be the place to share that kind of information. Next slide. So, the bottom line is the quality and message conveyed by your narrative is really within your control. A poorly written personal statement may very likely hurt you, whereas a well-written and engaging statement will often help, particularly in situations where you may have some strengths, but also some weaknesses in your credentials. Next slide. I mentioned for those of you that are applying MD, PhD, there are 2 additional essays required. The MD, PhD essay, 3,000 character limit, and the prompt is to state your reasons for wishing to pursue the MD, PhD. And then you have a 10,000 character limit to specify your research supervisor's name, affiliation, the duration of the experience, the nature of the problem you studied, and your contribution to the research effort. It's important if you are applying MD, PhD to certainly have folks in the lab read your essay, have your mentors review this information, certainly way before you decide to submit it. Next slide. And then we have the secondary essays. And again, the secondary essays will be sent to you by the individual schools that you apply to. They are school specific, and they often consider the mission statement of the schools. The more schools that you apply to, the greater the number of essays you will be writing. So give yourself adequate time to submit quality writing. You'll be doing this, mostly in July and August. And so they are quite time consuming and labor intensive. Ideally, you want to complete the secondary essays about 2 weeks after receipt. But I caution you not to sacrifice the quality for the speed. There are some schools, and you'll have to pay attention to this, but there are some schools that have deadline dates for receipt of the secondary essays. Sometimes it's a good idea to employ strategies such as submitting to schools you are most interested in first, or schools where you are the best fit. And be sure to carefully read the question and recognize it's not a one size fits all. As much as you would hope that it would be, it isn't. There are little quirks to these questions, and you'll need to tailor your essays for each individual school. It's not easy work. It can be frustrating, but please don't rush it. And of course, make sure to proof it. Try to make the best to make your writing engaging. And also keep in mind, if the essay says it's optional, it's optional. You don't need to complete it. Next slide. Here are some common themes. They may ask you to describe a personal challenge. Common question is, what makes you interested in our school? Why our school? And for this type of question, it does require you to do a little bit of research, reviewing the website, perhaps watching some online videos of the schools, reading recent news of the school, and find reasons why this school in particular will be a good fit for you. They may ask you to describe an ethical dilemma you faced. Um, and they may ask you what you'll be doing this year. You know, if you're taking a gap year, they'll for sure want to know what you're doing. A common question is, what would you bring to our class? How would you contribute to the diversity of our class? And you'll notice that there will be overlap between some of the themes in the secondary essays and the primary application. Um, and schools know this, but try to approach the information you include in a different way. Next slide, please. And finally, again, the bottom line is good writing takes time. And, we at Gallon Education do provide advising services, and help with the entire application process, including help with your essays. So, feel free to reach out to us. And, if any of you have any questions, we will take them at this time.
Thank you so much, Meryl. Yes, welcome everyone to place your questions in the chat if you have any. And again, we offer a free complimentary consultation for anyone who's interested. So you're welcome to just email us at info@galloned.com. We're happy to get you set up with that 30-minute free consultation just to go over your specific, unique situation, because these are the things we can't really go over in questions here. So that's just an opportunity for you to ask us personalized questions about your unique situation. So feel free to put your questions in the chat and we're happy to answer them and help you as best we can.
Any questions? I see a lot about the sound and
I think that might have just been a one minor internet connection issue
oh,
there.
okay.
I think most folks were
All
able to
right,
follow
good.
along with us. Yes. Any other questions? Seeing a great question here. What's the best timeline or frame for junior year? And I wonder, Abby, if you mean like just preparing oneself, like when to begin preparing that essay or those essays during the junior year. Is that what you're referring to, Abby? Yes. Okay. So yeah, generally how to use your junior year and really begin to develop these materials. Do you want to comment on that, Meryl?
Um, yeah. The best in terms of the personal statement, I think it's a wise idea to begin working on your first draft in, I would say, right around this time, early February. Give yourself, now this is assuming that you're going to be applying after your junior year, I guess. You want to begin, jotting down ideas. If you're doing volunteer work, for example, keep a journal. Any kind of clinical activities, jot it down in the journal. But actually, to begin writing your personal statement, I would say, January, early February would be a time to begin the writing, and then plan to keep refining it in, March and April, and seek advice so that everything looks good to go by the end of May. That would be my advice.
Yes, absolutely. And just building off of that, there was another question too, that for folks who want more personalized support from us, there was an inquiry of, can you have that complimentary consultation with us later later, like over the summer, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anytime you'd like to chat with us is a good time, to come to. It's a good time now if you're planning to apply for this coming cycle. We'd recommend that now. However, if you're thinking about it in the future, yes, absolutely, you can meet with us over the summer or later than that. Yeah. Other questions that folks have? Okay, another question coming in. When asking how a student can contribute to the diversity of an incoming class, what might admissions be looking for, especially if you might not have that typical quote unquote diverse background?
Hmm.
Yes, this is a great question. We can absolutely talk about it in individual consultations, but I think Meryl can absolutely comment on this. Do you want to
Yeah.
give some thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, diversity is a very broad term. So, you can't just look at it as, cultural diversity or racial diversity. There are students that have unique interests, for example. Perhaps um, I've read students who were um, involved in athletics, for example, in college. That adds to the diversity of the class. Perhaps they um, I've read about students who did fashion designing as an undergraduate, for example, or students that contributed to their school's magazine, for example. All of this adds to the diversity of the class. Or maybe you did something interesting in the summer. I've read about students who did some volunteerism at a prison, something a little bit different. All of that adds to the class. And so, don't be scared of the word diversity, in other words. I think people tend to think of it only in one way, but it's a much broader term than that. Anything else you want to add to that, Jen?
No, I
Yeah.
fully agree, and just wanted to let you know too about another great question coming in from Diana. What do you think? Do med schools prefer students or applicants to go right from undergrad to med school, or are you seeing that there's a preference for students to take a
Hmm.
gap year or more? What would you say about that?
Yeah. Without a doubt, I think there is a strong preference for students that take a gap year or two. And that's to the benefit of you as well. It's gives you that, in my opinion, the expectations for medical school applicants has continued to grow. So, over the last few years, you have more courses that you need to have completed. The expectation for a robust clinical experience has increased, and it's very difficult to complete all these expectations within 3.5 years. And so if you look at the gap year as an opportunity to, um, kind of spread things out a little bit, maybe um, explore other interests that you have, because once you start medical school, you're on a straight trajectory, basically for the rest of your life. So by taking a gap year, you could work, hopefully something related to medicine, earn some money, gain experiences. You'll have much more to write about in your personal statement. It'll be easy. The whole process becomes easier for you. Maybe you'll want to do a little traveling, maybe, spend more time with family, whatever it is, that extra year or two, I think will be invaluable. And medical schools, um, you could see the difference. They see the difference between somebody who is coming straight out of undergraduate school and somebody who's taken the time to gain more experience. And so right now, probably at least 65% of students now take a gap year, and it seems to be going up each year. And so I always think that's the best, gives you the best chance for success. It gives you much more flexibility also on when to take the MCAT, for example. And in addition to that, if you're gaining new experience in that gap year, you can have, new letters of recommendation, additional letters sent on your behalf. If you think about medical school and medicine in general, it's a lifelong career, and there's no rush to get into it, that's my opinion. And in working with applicants truthfully, particularly over the last 3, 4 years, I would say, um, the students that apply right after their junior year often are disappointed, even if they have strong grades and strong MCATs. And the reason for that is they don't have that opportunity to gain those rich experiences that those students that take that gap year have.
Yeah. This is a great conversation, Meryl, because I'm getting some more questions
Oh,
regarding
yeah.
gap years. So one comes in from Patricia. So when would be the best year to apply to med school if you plan to take a gap year? Should you apply after the gap year or during it? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's why I say gap year or two. I guess it depends what you're doing during that gap year, but you probably receive the greatest benefit by applying after the gap year, particularly if you're doing something, really significant. So let's say for that student that, is going to work as a medical assistant. I mean, I could think of a student that I've been working with this year, this past cycle rather. Um, he he graduated in 2024, and is taking a gap year this year. He is working actually as a medical assistant, but he just started that job right around the time that he submitted his application. So while the medical schools may know, you're going to do this, you can't really say much. And so you have to rely then on submitting updates to schools to say, okay, now I've been working as a medical assistant for a few months. And it works, it worked for him. He was accepted. But it would have been easier, I think, to spend that full year working and then apply. Um, what's your take, Jen?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think if you can really, by the way, I've never had anyone who's taken a gap year and then applied and like ever come back to me and say they wish they hadn't done that. It's always
Right,
been for them personally so valuable, and they have so much more to share in their application, so much more to talk about on secondaries and
right,
interviews. And they, in my experience, I've seen they have generally more success and more choices also, maybe more
right.
acceptances and choices. So
Yes,
generally speaking, I agree with that. If you're somebody who could really benefit from having that time to gain that experience, it's really, really incredibly valuable.
yeah.
Um, and
Another factor,
mhm.
actually, excuse me, is applicants that take these gap years tend to interview better. You have more maturity, you have more life experience. You've been out perhaps working. Um, it the whole process becomes not to say it's easy, but easier, and you'll have
Absolutely.
more confidence too.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And it seems like this topic, we might have to do a webinar on gap years because we have a lot of questions on that. We had
Yeah.
another great question from Ashok, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. But basically, this question is about what about post-bac programs during a gap year? What are your thoughts
Mhm.
on that, Meryl?
Yeah. Well, there are two kinds of post-bac type of programs. One is a post-bac that's designed for students that were non-science majors. They need to complete the pre-med requirements. So that's one type of postbac. The other type are generally called special master's programs, and they're designed for students who perhaps maybe didn't do as well in their science courses as they'd like. Maybe their GPA is in that 3.3, 3.4 range. Um, I think I mean, I'm a big advocate for special master's programs. Again, it gives you an opportunity. It's designed for students in the exact same situation, students that need to enhance their academic credentials. It provides a year's worth of courses where you can take upper level courses and really show that you know science. The other benefit of it is there may be a research or a capstone project related to this type of program. It also, there may be a clinical component. One of the biggest advantages of them is that most of them will offer a letter writing, so you get new letters of recommendation, because if you're the type of student that perhaps didn't do as well in science as an undergrad, um, your letter writers from the undergrad aren't going to be able to showcase your talent if you didn't do well in their course. So this gives you another opportunity to kind of start fresh, do really well and secure new letters of recommendation. So it's a good idea. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's certainly a worthwhile thing to do during a gap year.
Yeah, and again, I think you're welcome. Thanks for that wonderful question. And really again, these are if we could go over your unique personal profile when we meet with folks in those 30-minute consultations, we basically do a whole run through of your academics, if you've taken the MCAT or what your thoughts are about when you might plan to take that. We talk about your clinical experience, your leadership, your activities, what's a good timeline. We really talk about all of it so we can give you the best advice on if we think a post-bac would be a good fit for you or a special master's program and like when you might do that. So if you have personal questions that you want us to answer, we're happy to do that with you individually and one-on-one. So yeah, we have a few minutes remaining, just about 3 minutes left, 2 minutes now on my clock. So, oh, looks like we have another great question coming in from Bruce. So a question we asked at the last webinar, if an applicant graduated during the pandemic with all lectures recorded and no opportunities to meet with faculty or request letters, but has really great service and clinical experiences like AmeriCorps and tech on a
Mhm.
neuroscience unit, what would you suggest to get those needed letters of recommendation?
Mm, wow.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Um,
Mm.
wow. I mean, most schools will ask for at least, usually three letters, two from science professors, one from a non-science professor. Um, all lectures recorded, no opportunities. That's a good question. Um, I mean, if it was impossible to get letters from faculty, it might be the kind of situation you would have to reach out to individual schools to see what their policy is. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe they would make, you know, a concession saying, we will take letters from AmeriCorps in lieu of an academic letter. But I wouldn't assume that they would accept it. I think you'd need to investigate that a little bit further.
Yeah, and a couple thoughts I have. I would if that was the case for some of your classes and you would like to get a letter from one of those folks, you can meet with the faculty even post the class and really have a
Mm,
conversation with them about about the experience. Obviously it was unprecedented that we went through this pandemic, and really just see if you could meet with them and share about who you are as a person, what you got out of the class, especially if you performed well, and ask if they'd be willing to write a letter given the circumstances. And you can even work on providing a draft for that person so that they could of course they need to agree to that. That is one option. Another option would be, and I know it does cost money and it's an added component, but would be to take an additional upper level science class at an undergraduate institution. Like maybe it's cell bio or something you haven't taken, genetics, and try to develop a relationship with that faculty member. I know it's sounds a little bit wild to have to do that for a letter of recommendation. However, most medical schools are looking for letters of rec from faculty because they want to see how you perform in the sciences and in your non-science classes. So I do think that, especially, of course, it was challenging for folks who went through that in their undergrad going through the pandemic. However, I do believe that there may have been some opportunities to still get to know faculty in at least maybe one of the years, um, even if it weren't the first couple of them or the
Yeah,
last
well,
couple of them. So Meryl, do you want to
right.
comment on that?
Yeah. Well, now I'm reading, it sounds like this happened during your last year of school.
Mhm.
So maybe going back to
Mhm.
professors that you had as a
Mhm.
sophomore, for example,
Yeah.
if that's possible.
Yeah. Well, we're actually out of time, and want to just say thank you so much for everyone who attended and the incredible questions that you asked. I think we may end up doing a webinar on gap years and some of these other topics that you all have such interest about. But again, want to thank my colleague Meryl for such an incredible, insightful presentation. Again, she has background exact as a director of admissions at Robert Wood Johnson School of Medicine. So you're hearing it from the people who do this work, and we're here to offer those complimentary consultations at no, free, entirely free, just to help support and educate you. And then, of course, if you want more deeper support, we can talk to you about what that is if it's of interest to you. But thank you for being here. We will send the recording out tomorrow, and if you have any questions, you're always welcome to send us an email. We really love what we do, and we want to help you along your journey so you can achieve your dreams. That is our goal. So, Meryl, any last words that you want to
Oh,
share?
I mean, thank you for listening. And again, stay in touch with us. And yeah, we'd be happy to try to help you.